What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Saturday Morning College Football Show here on RotoGrinders. Happy to be with you as we are every Saturday morning, leading you up close to lineup lock, week number 7 of college football. Some really good games on the schedule today, highlighted by Oregon and Washington, 2 top 10 teams this afternoon, and then USC and Notre Dame will be facing off tonight. So those are the two premier games, I guess, on the schedule today, but a pretty good DFS slate as well. And we'll go through that here for you, getting you ready as you set your lineups here on this Saturday morning. And I am Justin Van Zuiden, as usual, hosting the show here for you today. STL Cardinals 84 in the daily fantasy streets. And I've got John Laub aside as usual. John, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. A little tired. I stayed up too late watching that Colorado game last night, but I got up, on time to prepare for the show. So I'm ready for the Oregon-Washington game. I can't wait till 3:30.
I went to bed at halftime, so imagine my surprise. So if you did not follow the game last night, Colorado was facing a winless in the Pac-12 Stanford team. Colorado led 29-0 at halftime. That is when I went to bed. I got awakened at 4 o'clock in the morning by a smoke alarm needing a battery. Of course, that happens at 4 a.m. The little chirp from the smoke detector at 4 o'clock as I'm groggily trying to figure out how to just unhook the darn thing for a couple of hours so I can go back to sleep. Checked my phone and saw that Colorado lost. Which was wild. And then I was just kind of awake at that point after checking all that news out. But we got the battery change in the smoke detector this morning. All should be good. And it always happens in the middle of the night. I swear. That's always when the batteries go out. But
it happened on my brother's wedding night. Literally at 3:30 in the morning, and I had to get up at a hotel room, and I was outside the day my brother was getting married. So I know the struggle.
I'm sitting there trying to figure out how to unhook the thing, and I'm like, man, I'm really groggy. I'm pretty short, so I'm standing on a chair. It's like 4:05 in the morning. The dog starts barking. It's just it's wild. That's how my morning has gone here today, but that's all right. We'll take a nap later this afternoon. But in any case, we got to start going through this college football slate. Like I said, a pretty good one today. 12 games on the main DraftKings slate once again today. As far as injury news, still not crazy compared to what you would normally see at this point of the season. Johnny Wilson is out for Florida State today. Emeka Egbuka is out for Ohio State. Of course, the big one that we need to keep an eye on is Travion Henderson. Some rumblings that he may not play again this week. Of course, he missed last week's game, which gave us some value in the Ohio State backfield, which may or may not have worked out for you depending on how you played it. But what are you keeping an eye on as far as injury news here this morning?
Well, it's definitely Travion Henderson. I knew about Egbuka. I think they told us yesterday or maybe Thursday. So I was able to pivot and find other options there. I found out about Wilson early this morning, but Henderson's the one I just found out. And we also have Daniels. I believe Kansas is on this slate, right? Jason Bean. It looks like, all reports that Jason Bean is going to start at quarterback for Jalen Daniels for the Jayhawks today.
Yeah, that's been a week-to-week situation, it seems like, all year. Bean has always had some upside when he's gotten some starts there for Kansas. He isn't super cheap, though. He's up to $7K on DraftKings now. Kind of a middling matchup against Oklahoma State there today for Kansas. So I don't think that makes or breaks the slate if you decide you just don't want to deal with it. Probably not the end of the world today. The good news is that the Ohio State game is at noon, so we should know prior to lock, I guess, if Henderson is dressed and or warming up. If that news hits during the show, we will certainly pass it along to you. Of course, you can stay tuned to everything in our Discord channel, rotogrinders.com/Discord. You can just get in there by simply being a RotoGrinders member. Don't have to be a premium subscriber, though we'd love to have you. If you're interested, tons of great premium college football content behind the paywall. But you can get into the Discord and stay up to date with all the news in the college football channel over there. If you need to keep tabs on that throughout the day, do it on your phone. and make sure you don't get stuck with a 0 in your lineup. So, all right, let's dig into this slate and start at quarterback. Of course, the two highest priced quarterbacks on the slate are in that headline matchup between Oregon and Washington this afternoon. Michael Penix, Bo Nix, two guys at the forefront of the Heisman race. 67-point total in that game. Both teams projected to score over 30 points, and two quarterbacks that, even if we sort by raw points, I mean, they're the top two projected raw point scorers today, but they are expensive. And this is maybe the first week on DraftKings where salary has been kind of tight. I mean, it's not like there's a ton of easy value out there today. So what do you do with Penix and Nix? Do you have a favorite? Do you think you need to play one of them with regard to salary today? How are you handling these two elite quarterbacks?
This has been a great slate to put together a lineup because DraftKings did a very nice job on putting it together. It's been difficult, and I tried so hard to get Penix and Nix in a lineup, but you just give up so much value at the other positions because they're both over 10K. So I believe you need to choose one of the two. My preferred one that I have in my lineups right now, for the most part, I mean, obviously you always have to differentiate, but I prefer Michael Penix. And here is why. Where Bo Nix had his value last year was with his legs. He had 14 rushing touchdowns for the Ducks. He was incredible from a fantasy football standpoint. This year, the Ducks have such a good stable of running backs. They've been allowing those running backs to score. Also, they hit a lot of home runs. They can get a 50-yard chunk play for a touchdown from their running backs. So Penix is the better thrower of the football, and Bo Nix is very good. I'm not trying, we're such thin lines here. If there is one quarterback that I believe is in line to throw for 4 touchdowns and to have a ceiling of or a floor of 320 yards, that's Penix in my book. And the biggest mismatch on the slate in this game is the Oregon Ducks offensive line against the Washington front 7. The Oregon Ducks have a massive unit advantage in the front 5. So they will be able to throw the football. So I'm going to go with Penix here. Let's say if I had 10 lineups, Penix is in 7 of them, my friend.
Yeah, I agree. I think Penix is the choice as well. I mean, you look, he's had 400 passing yard games. He's got 2 elite wide receivers. Really tough to go away from that pass offense in terms of both floor and ceiling here. If Nix happens to have one of those, rushing games like we saw last year, as you mentioned, I think the ceiling is potentially there. I just think that the odds of that happening are a little bit lower, given that, Oregon has been utilizing their running backs a little bit more this year than compared to years past. So I agree with your thoughts on that. Though I don't, I don't think you have to play one of them if you don't feel comfortable getting up to a 10K plus salary. I think you can make do with guys that are a little bit cheaper. You're probably getting a little bit lower floor with some of this kind of next range. You got Jordan Travis as a big favorite. You've got Carson Beck as a big favorite. You've got Jalen Milroe as kind of a wild card, lower floor, higher ceiling. You've got Tagovailoa in here. I mean, if you've got a lineup where you aren't being able to get up to that 10K range for quarterbacks, who do you feel most comfortable with as kind of the next step down?
And it's interesting because I do think you can pivot off of the 2 quarterbacks. I agree with you there, but then you have to find value. The player that I have a lot of in my lineups today is Jalen Milroe. I think he's very interesting against Arkansas here. And I know Arkansas can be they're a tougher defense than people think against the quarterbacks, but I don't think Arkansas has faced a lot of quarterbacks as talented. Now, they did get Jackson Dart last week, but I want to see if that's an anomaly or if they're really that good up front. I'm not convinced they're that dominant up front. I think it was a little bit of Jackson Dart. He's inconsistent. What I like about Milroe is we have a nice ceiling. If you go back to the opening game, he scored 36 points. Then he was kind of benched and stuff. but he's had the job the last 2 weeks. He scored 25 and 23 DraftKings points. But last week might have been the weirdest stat line. He was better throwing the football, 321 yards. He had minus 31 yards rushing against Texas A&M. I do not believe that the Arkansas linebackers are as good or fast as the Texas A&M athletes. So I expect Milroe to get at least positive yardage. At least I would think there's a floor of 40 rushing yards there. In 2 games this year, Milroe's had double-digit rushing touchdowns. Why I like that here is Alabama's backfield isn't – how long have we been watching Alabama's backfield with super studs back there, right? This is the first time I can remember, I think in like 12 years since Mark Ingram, that Alabama doesn't have a stud rushing the football. It looks like Milroe might get those rushing touchdowns this week. So I like Milroe a ton.
Yeah, I think he's a really strong play as well. I've got him tagged here in our lineup HQ tool today. I think the ceiling is really intriguing there. And he comes at a $1,600 discount from Knicks, $1,800 discount from Penix. So can help your lineup come together a little bit better if you are not on those top guys. I don't mind, if you want to go to Carson Beck, that's fine. I just worry about Georgia just absolutely blowing the doors off Vanderbilt today. They're favored by like 32 points. So just don't see them having to throw the ball as much in the second half today. So let's see. Let's go ahead and head down into that next range where I think it's, pretty wide open. I don't have a ton of interest in the, JJ McCarthy, Kyle McCord type today. Tougher matchups for Garrett Schrader and KJ Jefferson, a few guys that can maybe get there with their legs. It's not really until you get down to Emory Jones. Emory Jones chalk week doesn't feel very good on the surface, but his price is pretty reasonable today. Where do you stand on kind of this next group of quarterbacks here?
I'm Schrader and that Syracuse offense last week really disappointed me, even LaQuaint Allen. Now they go on the road to FSU, and FSU isn't an awful defense, but they do have good athletes in the front seven, so I don't like Schrader. JJ McCarthy, I just don't see the ceiling there. Blake Corum in the running game, they just get too many points out of the running game. They're probably going to blow out, Indiana today, so I'm worried about McCarthy's ceiling. I know you mentioned it. It's hard to think that there's an Emory Jones chalk day, but when I looked at the numbers in the ceiling and broke it down, my friend, I'm very intrigued here. We have a game with over 50. That's crazy. I don't expect that. Again, that was at Eastern Kentucky. But then he had against Miami of Ohio 29.7 and against BYU on the road 30. The problem with Emory Jones is he's inconsistent. We have 2 games with under 14 points. As long as you are comfortable with the possibility of the inconsistency, I like him. He also hasn't scored a rushing touchdown in the past 2 games. And we know rushing touchdowns are fickle. They can come and go, but he does have elite rushing upside. He had 101 yards against Miami of Ohio and 94 yards rushing last week against BYU. I don't think ISU has the front 7 who can deal with the athletic ability of Emory Jones. He is at a really reasonable price at $7,300. So he's the quarterback I like most there, as long as you're comfortable with the inconsistency.
Yeah, I mean, the salary is going to dictate you might need to go if you're going with a quarterback in your super flex, which most people do, that you're probably going to have to go cheap at your second quarterback today. Jones will be a popular choice for many, I'm sure, along with maybe two others that we haven't really talked about yet. I suppose you could throw a Hudson Card in that mix, but Purdue just hasn't shown a whole lot offensively this year. But Max Johnson now has the reins at Texas A&M. You've got Luke Altmaier. The Illinois offense was pretty popular as values last week. I would imagine that's going to be the case again. Or I guess maybe it was 2 weeks ago that they were on the Saturday main slate. But anyway, last time they were on the Saturday main slate, they were pretty popular because of the salaries. So Max Johnson, Luke Altmaier, potentially Bean if he starts again. You have any interest in going all the way down the board here?
I would say if you want to go heavy at wide receiver, say you wanted to stack the Ducks and Washington or go with Marvin Harrison. I do like Luke Atmeyer as a pivot, but you really have to be comfortable because it was 2 weeks ago, I think we were talking about him, right? Or maybe 3 weeks ago. And I played him in my lineups. I think he had like a 13 or 14 point day, but he's by far the cheapest one with an understanding that I'm not going to get a high ceiling. I'm looking for a floor play only. And Mac Johnson, I think if you're in GPP, but we have a high ownership. Wow. We have 20. I don't even think I would use Johnson then in GPP because the ownership is higher than I thought against Tennessee. I would have thought he'd be lower.
Yeah, that's a pretty big number. I think the salary is kind of what's dictating that. The tighter salary cap today maybe has a few more people on him than usual. Anything else at quarterback? I think we've kind of covered it here.
No, I think we did it great. I'm not interested in Kyle McCord. I don't know. The Ohio State Buckeyes passing game, it's just not working outside of Marvin Harrison.
Yeah, just play, especially with Igbukah out today, just play Harrison if you want exposure to that passing game. All right, let's move to running backs, where I think it's tough to get the top 2 or 3 guys here today. Corum, Braylon Allen, they're great running backs. It's just tough to fit them with the salaries today. I mean, Michigan's projected for close to 40 points, so it could be a breakout spot for Corum, especially since Edwards hasn't really done much this year. But what you're going to see most people do is just kind of skip the 8K plus running backs and start their lineups with Bucky Irving today. You mentioned it when we were talking about quarterbacks. Oregon just using their rushing attack a lot more this season, having an advantage on the front lines in this game. Feels like a potential bust out spot for Bucky Irving. So he's going to be the favorite, but who do you like at the top of the board here?
I do. Bucky Irvin's in all my lineups. I'm just willing, I kind of like the Bucky Irvin, Michael Penix. I think they're a nice little play off of each other because if Oregon gets up in the game running the football, then Penix has to play catch-up mode. So I do love that. And I love Bucky Irvin. He's their most explosive. It's hard. The Oregon Ducks run in so many different players in the backfield. But to me, looking at the advanced stats, Irvin's the most explosive. I will say this, though. I do not have cash game lineups with Corum or Allen. Yet, if you really want to get funky in GPP and you want to pivot away from the quarterbacks, because I think that's where most people are going to go.
Sure.
Corum and Braylon Allen are interesting. Look at, they're both under 10% ownership. I think they're be, that's very low for 2 stud running backs. I don't like them in cash games, but I think in GPP, it's a very interesting strategy to say, let me go down lower at quarterback and let me see if I can get maybe 60, 70 points out of these 2 running backs.
Yeah, it's definitely not a path that most people are going to take today just because it's tough to fit those highest end guys in and feel good about your lineup, without taking a punt shot somewhere else. So definitely like it as a tournament play if you can fit them in there, especially Corum at that ownership. All right, I'll give you the floor here as we go down to this next range, kind of 6 and 7K range of running backs. Who's standing out to you as far as a good, RB2 play, kind of mid-range options here?
When I first looked at the numbers Thursday evening, the guy who stuck out to me the most, but it seems that the whole we've caught on as a community, it's Ollie Gordon, Oklahoma State. Now, in the beginning of the year, it was strange because when you were looking at the depth chart for Mike Gundy's team over the summer, it looked like Ollie Gordon was going to be the guy. And I still don't understand how in the beginning of the year he didn't use him. But then all of a sudden, a couple of weeks ago, the light bulb must have gone off, right? Like, he's our best offensive player. What is Gundy and the Cowboys doing? In the last 2 games, he scored 20 and 24 points on DraftKings. I've also watched the Oklahoma State Cowboys. To me, in my book, eyeball test, Gordon is by far their best offensive player. Now, we have him at 33% ownership. I like him in my cash game, so he's the one I love. I am interested in LaQuaint Allen, but I'll tell you where I pivoted the most from. It is to Dylan Johnson of Washington. If you want to get off the Huskies passing game, so if you want to go Bo Nix, I think Dylan Johnson, he's at 58. I see we have him at a 23% ownership, but the more I looked at the numbers and the more I studied Dylan Johnson, I have a running back at home in the highest over under. And I think Oregon has to put assets against those wide receivers on Washington. So that leaves, I think there might be a lot of audibles where Michael Penix is so smart, he just might audible to a run play with Dylan Johnson. He also has some sneaky upside. He had 5 receptions last week against Arizona, and earlier in the year against Boise State, he had 3 receptions. So I kind of like Dylan Johnson here for the savings and a pivot if you want to get off of the off the Huskies passing game.
Yeah, I like that call there, particularly in lineups where you don't have exposure to Penix or Odunze or McMillan. Ollie Gordon is definitely my favorite in here as well for the reasons that you mentioned. I mean, his output the last 2 games, he's had, I think, 40 touches total those couple of games, and still reasonably cheap. Decent matchup against Kansas. They're projected for 25 points today. So Ollie Gordon is definitely probably the cash game lock for sure today. And not a ton of options in this range. I mean, Jason McClellan, you could maybe throw in that mix as well. I think is fine, but
can I give you one other if possible? Sure. Roman Hembry of Maryland. We have him at less than 5%. He has a very high ceiling, but unfortunately his floor is really low. And I was looking at some of his stats. In games in which Maryland are favorites and they should win, Hembry's very good. In games in which they are the underdog and they get blown out, Hembry's awful. So the game script does tell us that Hembry is in a good spot. He's a little more pricey than I wanted. I was hoping he was going to be like 56, 55 range.
Yeah, he's been overpriced all year for whatever reason.
Yeah, right? All year.
And I remember I've played him. I think I played him when they talked about him on here when they played Michigan State. And he ended up with 10 carries for 12 yards that day. So I've been a little gun shy on Hemby since then, but certainly like the potential if Maryland can get out to a lead today as well. All right, let's move down the bottom of the running back range today. I think the interesting options here, a few guys right around that 5K mark. Of course, the Ohio State. Let's talk about that, I guess, first. What are we doing with Ohio State if Henderson doesn't play today?
If Henderson doesn't play, so I found Chip. Okay. He's pretty low down the slate here. I have it based on salary. Oh, now I can't find him all of a sudden. He popped up in my
Chip is 5K.
5K. Now, my eyeball test, because I played him last week, we got news that Henderson was definitely out. And my eyeball test said Trainum isn't very good. However, the matchup against Purdue is really enticing. Yet, what about Mayan Williams? Are they going to go to him? Because I would think if the coaching staff broke down the Trainum film, they weren't overly excited. So I'll say this. I'm staying away from the Ohio State running back situation if Henderson is out. And we don't know yet. We're looking for information as the show is going on.
It looks like he is warming up, but that's all we have.
Okay. So if he's out, I'm not playing Trainum or Williams, though. They could split the carries.
Yeah, they could. And they've got Penn State next week. So, it just, if the game gets out of hand, it's just a tough spot. We do have somebody like on the field beat reporter reporting that Henderson is warming up. So he's not in street clothes, which in my opinion right now is just a situation I'm going to pass on. So if you're looking to go cheap, is it Maccabee I've seen some love for this week? Corey Kiner, again, with Cincinnati having a fairly high total. Le'Veon Moss is another guy. Do you go to Donovan Edwards? This is as cheap as probably we've ever seen him. Fagan for Illinois, getting some ownership. None of these guys are locks by any means, but you probably have to play like at least one guy down here. Do you have a favorite?
My favorite is Le'Veon Moss. Against Tennessee and at Texas A&M, if they want to keep the Tennessee offense off the field, I think you've got to keep Le'Veon Moss, give him about 15 carries minimum today. He's been very good. I like him, but he's at a high ownership, 25%, because he's not a lock, but he is a salary saver at running back. To me, if you want to differentiate, Corey Kiner of Cincinnati, if maybe you don't go with Emory Jones, if you think that Cincinnati is going to use Kiner more effectively in the goal line, you can use Kiner as a pivot there. And I do kind of like Muckaby. The thing I'm concerned about, he's had some fumbling problems, and that's what got him off the field at times. But what I like about Muckaby is he's basically with Tyrone Tracy. Is that the usual? Is he the other player they were playing at running back? I think it's Tyrone Tracy. He's out today, so it should be Muckaby's backfield. So he's a very interesting player here because he does have pass catching duties. In the last 2 weeks, he's got 5 receptions. He had 4 receptions against Syracuse. And in the last 2 weeks, he's combined for over 35 DraftKings points. So I do think Muckaby is a very interesting pivot for the Boilermakers.
And this is a guy that, I mean, we saw him have some massive games last year. So
yes.
It's definitely a spot where he could surprise here. And I think he's a really interesting option in GPPs if you want to go for some upside there. Ownership is maybe projected a little bit higher than I would have expected, but still think he's fine for tournaments. I don't really have a whole lot else here at the bottom end of the board. Again, Fagan for Illinois is 4,500. If you need a punt, he's fine. Do you have anybody else here?
The only guy I've heard some buzz around is Caleb Johnson, but I can't go Iowa Buckeyes against Wisconsin. I do think he had a big touchdown run. He had been the starter last year as a freshman, but I can't put him in cash game lineups. I just think he's too inconsistent at the running game at Iowa.
Yeah, Iowa has a 12-point total today, which is just brutal. And that's a national Fox game, I think. Not a.
I can't believe that game's on the national. And I'm surprised it's on the slate, but that's a whole different story.
For sure. Not the most exciting one. You won't see us talking about a lot of guys. 34-point total in that game. It's wet and ugly, and it's Iowa football for you. All right, let's go ahead and move to wide receiver, where I think it's a really, really interesting discussion at the top today. I think you've got both guys for Washington. Obviously, Penix is projected for like 360 passing yards today. You've got Odunze, you've got McMillan, you've got Troy Franklin as the top guy for Oregon, and you've got Marvin Harrison with a 100-yard receiving prop, with Noah Egbuka and a banged up, Travion Henderson, even if he's out there, not at 100%. So do you have a favorite among the Washington guys / Troy Franklin / Marvin Harrison here?
My favorite is Marvin Harrison, and it's really based upon the news that we're getting out of Ohio State. Worried about their running game. Also without Egbuka. Look at what I thought Marvin Harrison, it was the second half of last week's game. All of a sudden, they finally woke up, and Kyle McCord, maybe they talked to him and said, dude, I don't care, just start throwing the ball to Harrison. Because, I'm watching the game, I'm like, okay, this is silly. Why are you not forcing the ball to Marvin Harrison? Now, maybe they weren't calling it. Those are things we don't know, right, from the sideline. Then all of a sudden, you just started seeing Marvin Harrison getting the ball 40 yards down the field. Purdue, I'm not afraid of him at all. I will say from a GPP perspective, I'm shocked that you're getting to Marvin Harrison right now. Our projections are less than 10%. He is a slate buster. We've seen the ceiling. I mean, if you told me right now Marvin Harrison's going to have 150 yards and 3 touchdowns, that's clearly possible. There's no doubt in my mind he could do that. He's a complete slate buster, and he's sitting there. Maybe it's the high salary, and everyone's so involved in the Washington and I get it. I love Washington-Oregon game too, but they have a 35-point implied total for the Buckeyes. And if Henderson's out, where are they going with the football, my friend? It seems like this is a Marvin Harrison day all over.
Yeah, I think his ownership will end up creeping a little bit higher than that just because of all the news that's broken later in the week. as far as, their injuries and Igbokwe being out. I think Harrison will end up being slightly higher. Not going to be mega chalk because I do think people will try to prioritize those Oregon, Washington guys, maybe a touch more on the whole. But Harrison certainly a really strong play as well. And then from there, you got Texas A&M. If you got some people playing their quarterback, you got Evan Stewart, but you've got Anaya Smith as obviously the more popular value on DraftKings today. You've got Keon Coleman as the clear wide receiver 1 for Florida State. You've got Brock Bowers. If you trust Georgia to throw the ball, for a good chunk of the game today, as other kind of higher end options before we start to get towards the value spectrum. Anything else you want to touch on here on the high end? Bowers, McMillan, Coleman?
I love Bowers, but you mentioned it when we were talking about Carson Beck. The good news, I would say, from Bowers' standpoint, if they're going to go up 28-0 at halftime against Vanderbilt, it's going to be because of Brock Bowers, right? The question then is, what does his target share look like in the second half? I'm surprised he's the highest owned wide receiver right now for projection. I've pivoted off of Brock Bowers because I'm just worried about the second half, but I do think his floor is amazingly high. The player that I like, the one I have most of, is Jalen McMillan. We have him at a nice ownership of 17%. He's less than Bowers. He is more than a Dunze, so maybe you go with the Dunze and GPP over McMillan. I love McMillan. I think he's a special player. I was watching ESPN this morning, and the coach, DeBoer, did say that McMillan's ready to go. Reports indicate McMillan's ready to go. He did have the bye week, so he should be healthy. Maybe, so I'm going with McMillan there. But Stewart's the pivot. I think if you really wanted pivot, maybe you go, and look at Troy Franklin. Maybe you build a lineup with Troy Franklin and Evan Stewart in a GPP to pivot off kind of the more popular plays there, because we know that Stewart could go off, and same thing with Franklin.
Yeah, I like both of those guys. Obviously tough to get both together in the same lineup, but it just big time ceiling from some of these guys today. I think you probably have to spend up for one of your pass catchers, just a matter of deciding which one of those guys you like the best. And then when we get to kind of the mid-range, Polk would be your third receiver option there for Washington. Andrew Armstrong, tough matchup, but he's the clear wide receiver 1 for Arkansas. Then you've got the Tennessee guys there. Squirrel White projects the best out of that group. Will Shepard for Vanderbilt, if you think he can get there with some volume today. I'm not really that interested in that, but anybody in the 6K range, you like a good bit here.
Well, I think there's two interesting ones that have really low ownership if you do want to try. Xavier, I think it's Xavier, if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, Henderson of Cincinnati. We've seen a really nice ceiling with Henderson. We have him at less than 1% ownership. And let me see what his ceiling has been. Let me open up the file here. We have a 29-point game earlier against Miami of Ohio, a 31-point game against Eastern Kentucky. Last week, he scored 14 points against BYU without getting in the end zone. So if you kind of like Xavier or Emory Jones and you want to do a contrarian stack, we have Henderson at around 1%. I like that. And it might sound kind of crazy, but Roman Wilson, we have seen what he can do on any one catch. We have him at less than 1% ownership. I know he had a down week last week. You're looking at efficiency, not value. Roman Wilson, you need the 2 touchdowns, probably hopefully beyond 30, 40 yards for him to hit. But at less than 1% ownership, an implied total of 39. And I do think Michigan will try in the first half to throw the ball. The question is, will they even put the ball in the air in the second half? But Roman Wilson at that low ownership is a very interesting GPP play.
Yeah, don't mind that at all for sure. If he can, he could certainly bust open the slate at that salary if he gets a couple big catches in the first half. All right, let's go down the board here a little bit more. And at this point, I think I'll just sort by our ownership so we catch the highest guys. And I think the two that are obviously going to stand out. I hinted at Anais Smith earlier, all the way down at 4,900 on DraftKings. We've talked about Illinois a little bit as well. Isaiah Williams. You've got Jashawn Jones, Jeremiah Hunter, Deion Burks as, again, guys that are all around 5K. The couple of the Oklahoma State guys are really cheap. Basically, people are going to be jamming in a cheap wide receiver or two today, whether it's at their wide receiver 3 position, a flex position, because you're going to need some salary relief. Corey Dyches, the tight end for Maryland, might even get some ownership here. So who is your favorite value play or two out of this bottom end?
I actually highlighted them both. I like Anais Smith and Isaiah Williams. I like both of those players very much. Isaiah Williams is a little bit tricky because the volume is there. The number of targets each week is just kind of crazy for not a great offense. Let's just put it that way for the Illini. But he hasn't scored a touchdown. Like, he is so overdue for a touchdown. Now, I didn't expect double-digit touchdowns out of Isaiah Williams this year, but I did expect between at least 5 and 7. So hopefully those are coming down the road. I mean, if you look at his numbers, he's been scoring, well into the double digits, 2 games over 20 points without scoring any touchdowns. If we ever get a little, touchdown variance in our favor, we're golden. And we mentioned when we were talking about Evan Stewart, I think the reason why he's so low owned is it seems like the community and our projections have Anais Smith. He's the one that everyone is pivoting to. I like him also in this game. I don't think I would play either of these two in GPPs, but I do like both. You definitely need some salary savers at wide receiver. I like both. You can go with either one. Smith is a little bit more interesting because he used to run the football. They haven't been running him this year like they used to put him on jet sweeps, and he actually was out of the backfield at times last year at Texas A&M. They have not done that. He only has 2 carries, I'm looking here, which is shocking, but he does have some rushing upside that you might get lucky on that. Those are the 2 that I like the most. But I was looking, the one guy, I'm not a Squirrel White guy. I think it's Keon Coleman, right? Johnny Wilson's out. I do think Keon Coleman has become pretty interesting against Syracuse. We haven't talked about him yet. We've seen the massive ceiling with Keon Coleman, and he's less than 7% ownership.
Yeah, I like some of those pivots today as well. I think these could be the plays that are interesting in GPPs to help come off some of this chalk. Do you have any interest in the Oklahoma State guys? I mean, so if everybody's playing Ollie Gordon, if they do happen to throw the ball a little bit, let me see if I can just highlight our projections for those guys. There we go. I mean, we've got Bray at 13 fantasy points. We've got Presley at 12. We've got Owens at 9. And they're all pretty cheap. Any interest here?
I did put together a lineup totally punting at one position. Sometimes I think we've all done it before. Grab a total punt play at the flex position. If you're going to pivot off Ollie Gordon, and that's what I was trying to do, pivot off of Ollie Gordon, I like Rashad Owens. He's only 3,500. He saw his most usage last week, 5 receptions for 75 yards. Now, the game was competitive. That's what I liked about it. He was getting targets in a competitive game, 29-21 against Kansas State. So I expect today's game against Kansas to be competitive. So I like the fact Rashad Owens would be on the field. He's a total punt play at 3,500, but he's the guy I've kind of targeted because I'm not in love with the other 2 options.
Yeah, it just does help make your lineup work. I mean, if you can get any play at 3,500 on DraftKings today that can just give you 8 or 10 points, it does help make the rest of your lineup come together a little bit better. So, all right, if you've got questions, you can pop some in the YouTube chat. You can pop some in the RotoGrinders College Football Discord channel. We'll catch those in a second. We'll also touch on FanDuel a little bit here before we close out the show for today. But as we like to do around this time, before we make that pivot, we know some of you might just be joining us, might have wondered, hey, who are the guys I absolutely need to build my lineups around today? So we want to let John give out his fantastic 4 selections for today to build your lineups around. So, John, who you got for your DraftKings Fantastic 4 today?
All right, if everyone can go to if you go to RotoGrinders, we have an optimizer. You can plug in the Fantastic 4 in the optimizer and get up to 50 lineups built around these 4 great players today. I am putting in, I mentioned it earlier, 70% of my cash game lineups is Michael Penix at quarterback. The ceiling is so high, and I expect him to throw the ball all over the place. I like him. Then I do have Ollie Gordon as a Fantastic 4 at running back today. I expect the Cowboys to run the football a lot and Gordon to produce a very nice number. My other running back that I have in the Fantastic 4, I do like Dylan Johnson. I have no problem. I think both him and Penix can be productive against the Oregon Ducks. You do need a little bit of a salary saver. I love Dylan Johnson here. And we mentioned him just lately. I like Isaiah Williams. He has a very nice floor at about 13 to 15 points. If we get a touchdown, we could have a 24, 25-point ceiling. So my Fantastic 4 are Michael Penix, Ollie Gordon, Dylan Johnson, and Isaiah Williams for viewers today to plug into the optimizer.
Awesome. Love those plays today as well. And I think that makes for a good start to your lineups. All right. Let's go ahead and pivot over to FanDuel, and I always like to just highlight the players that we haven't talked about yet because FanDuel does have an all-day main slate. There are a couple of afternoon games as well that aren't on the DraftKings slate, so I'll go ahead and highlight these guys over here. I mentioned at the top of the show that the Notre Dame USC game is kind of the highlight game on the evening slate, and folks, I don't understand why Notre Dame is favored in this game. The public loves to bet Notre Dame. I get it. And I look and I see that Notre Dame is favored by 2.5 points yesterday against USC. And I'm like, why? And I see Notre Dame is the most bet team by tickets and money on this today. And why? I mean, Notre Dame has done absolutely nothing this year to inspire confidence, right? They lost to Ohio State. They lost to Louisville. Louisville showed you the blueprint on how to beat this team. They should have lost to Duke. And now they're playing USC, who's undefeated. And I get it. I mean, USC struggled with Arizona. They don't have a great defense, but they do have Caleb Williams. And Notre Dame is a favorite against this team. And I don't see them scoring enough points to keep up with USC. So that's your free bet. Don't play the square Notre Dame public side. You're getting like plus 120 with USC, which is absolutely absurd today. So, you queue up Notre Dame going nuts now, I guess. But
I know we're not a betting show, but I did the same thing. I try to is it the run defense? Is it the secondary of Notre Dame? Is it just USC's pass defense? I can't figure it out, my friend. I love USC plus 3.5 today. I mean, it just seems crazy.
It is, and so this will be one where even if it doesn't work out, I still say you played the right side. Process over results, I guess. But in any case, we do have that game on the DFS night slate as well. As you can probably guess from my comment there, I'm not super interested in the Notre Dame players today. The problem is it's tough to target USC and DFS as well because they spread the ball around so much. But you can always play Caleb Williams. We've got Drake May. We've got Jaden Daniels, all the elite quarterbacks on the FanDuel slate today, in addition to, Nix and Penix. So I'll give you the floor here. Who are some of the guys you want to highlight that are on this FanDuel slate?
When I first opened up the FanDuel and I was putting together some lineups with projections, Jaden Daniels, I think, is the decision, right? Or Williams. I guess we should put both of them. And then I saw they were 12.6 and 11.7. I was like, oops. I am pivoting off of those two just because of the massive salary there. It really eats up your lineup. It's very hard to find. It's harder on FanDuel to find value. I understand why anyone would want to go with them. I get it. But I'm pivoting off of those two. If I had to choose one, I'm going to go Jaden Daniels. But I will say in GPP, This Caleb Williams at less than 10% is unbelievably enticing. Not in cash game, but in GPP to get Caleb Williams at that value or that low ownership is, to me, mind-blowing. The guy I can't believe here is look at Michael Penix here, less than 7%. The difference between DraftKings and on FanDuel, to me, is astounding on the ownership there. And I do like Drake May, but it seems like we have a high percentage ownership on Drake May at 17.6%, which means he's a cash game, not a GPP option.
Yeah, I'm going to refresh this there so I get more players in my table. There are just so many good quarterbacks on the FanDuel slate today that you're going to see ownership maybe spread around a little bit. Spencer Rattler, another guy that I think is interesting on FanDuel just because, South Carolina, they can score. I think they can keep up with Florida here. Rattler's pretty cheap at 8,200 on FanDuel. So I think he's an option there on the cheap. Morton, you can always play as well. Those would be two of the guys I would highlight at quarterback. If we move to running back, not a whole lot of additional options here on FanDuel. Ray Davis is great, but he's really expensive. I'm not playing Estime for obvious reasons. Imani Bailey would be the one guy to maybe add into the FanDuel mix. Logan Diggs is really affordable. Probably a little bit of a misprice there for Logan Diggs as the clear number one guy at LSU. Anyone you want to highlight at running back on FanDuel here?
I am shocked at this low ownership, and maybe it's just people have written him off, but he was impressive last week. Trey Benson, we have him at less than 1% projected ownership. Last week, I think he was clocked at over 22 miles per hour. You know how they have those cool new statistics when Trey Benson, if he goes to the combine and he does that kind of speed, he's going to rise up draft boards. Now, he has not played well until last week, but last week he blew my mind away. I didn't play him in any of the DFS, but I did play him in regular season in my redraft leagues. He was unbelievable, and I do think Taj Brooks, a little pricey. I was hoping I would get some value on Taj Brooks, but the Texas Tech running back has been really, really good. We have 19% projected ownership, but I do like him in cash games. But I think Trey Benson is the sneaky one here.
Yeah, I like that call on Benson. Brooks, definitely a safe play. Bailey, Diggs, those are your kind of safer guys, but some interesting GPP pivots. I think Carson Steele is somewhat interesting in tournaments as well. Marshawn Lloyd, if you think that USC can handle Notre Dame, definitely guys you can throw into that tournament mix. Wide receiver, you've got the same elite options that we have on DraftKings, plus the 100-yard machine that is Luther Burden, plus the 100-yard machine that is Malik Neighbors on FanDuel. Do you still like Harrison, and the Washington guys as well, better on FanDuel, or do you like Burden? Do you like Neighbors a little bit better?
Without the PPR, I do like Burden a little bit better. I think it's half right. It's so hard to remember all my right half point. So I do like Burden, but he's a high ownership. So I think for GPP, in my book, he's definitely out of the mix here because he's such high ownership. I also think Ricky Pearsall, we haven't talked about Florida at all, and I understand why people might not want to be on Florida, but South Carolina, they're not very good. So I think they're fascinating. Ricky Pearsall there, he's definitely kind of elevated himself to the number one wideout at Florida against South Carolina. I like him there also. I guess Neighbors is the guy we have not talked about, but I didn't put Neighbors in because he's over 10. He's 10.5K. So he is a little bit more pricey even than some of the other wide receivers on the slate. But Neighbors, we do know, has the slate breaking ability. I guess I would like Brian Thomas. What is this? I forgot about. What's Brian Thomas on this slate?
Yeah, I tagged him earlier. Let's see.
Because he's definitely got to be lower salary.
He is 94.
9.4. I guess that's still a little high, but he is.
I tagged him on the DraftKings night slate. That's the one I was thinking of. He's a little bit cheaper over there.
Yeah, I mean, but if you want to pivot, I think Brian Thomas is interested in there also.
We did have a question in the Discord chat about Xavier Johnson for Ohio State, with Egbuka out today. He's actually like plus 160 to score a touchdown, is what, let me give credit to who mentioned that. Swag with Chris in the Discord channel, plus 160 to score a touchdown. He's only 4,600, so reasonable value there if you need a punt. And you expect, Ohio State to, throw the ball to somebody other than Marvin Harrison at some point in that game.
I agree with you. But he doesn't get a lot of targets. You're hoping for the touchdown and efficiency.
Let's see. Anybody else on FanDuel? I don't see any other questions that we haven't addressed. Again, stay up to date in the Discord with the news.
Can I give you two players I like on FanDuel we haven't talked about?
Yeah, and I think Tez Walker deserves a discussion as well.
Oh, there you go. I didn't think I saw him, but I like Brendan Rice of USC. I mean, he has really become their best wide receiver. I know it's a crowded room, but I believe that Branch is out this week. And since Branch has been out, Rice has been really productive. I like him and Xavier Respo of the University of Miami. He, to me, is a very nice play this week. I think the Hurricanes, they're going to have to throw the ball against UNC. And we didn't even talk about the disaster. Oh, my God.
That was bad. That was really bad.
I mean, I will say 40 years of watching college football, that's probably the top 5 disasters I've ever seen.
I bet you if Miami gets a lead with under a minute to go and they'll take a knee this time. If you are wondering what we're referencing, it's all over social media so you can find it. But Miami had the game won last week against Georgia Tech. Under 40 seconds to go, no timeouts. They did not kneel. They ran a play. They fumbled the football, and then Georgia Tech scored with 1 second left on a long pass to win the game. Wild ending. You could have taken the knee and run the clock. It's a tough loss if you're a Miami fan. And then, Tez Walker on the other side of that game. So we talked about him last week, obviously just getting his eligibility back. We were unsure, how much he was going to play. He was $3K on DraftKings. A little bit of a price bump here today, but still pretty cheap on FanDuel. He did have 6 catches for 43 yards. So, I mean, obviously not the most glamorous stat line, but he did play and, certainly should continue to see his role increase. So any interest in Devontae Walker here?
A lot of interest. I saw 2 plays where he was targeted in the end zone and they just did not connect. Trey May. And someone said that there was a 3rd play. I'm flipping around games. I have multiple TVs on. Someone said he was actually targeted 3 times within the red zone. So I do think that he's due for a touchdown, and I like the number of targets he had. So I do like him this week.
Yeah, I think he's a really strong play there on FanDuel if you need a cheap wide receiver 3. All right, with that, probably time for us to put a wrap on the show for today. If you like the show, appreciate it. A lot of you watching here this morning, hit the thumbs up button. We appreciate that on the YouTube feed. Subscribe to the channel. You can get a notification whenever we go live. Again, keep up to date in our Discord if you want the news and updates throughout the day. And we will catch you back here next week, same time, same place, hoping that maybe at some point here in the Midwest, it stops raining. I mean, it has just been an ugly week. Probably gotten about 6 inches of rain here in Illinois over the last 72 hours. So, that's never fun. But today, that means I can stay inside. The wife is out shopping today, and grandma is coming to get the kids this afternoon. So I can just hang out with the dog and watch some football. And really looking forward to that Oregon-Washington game this afternoon. So thanks to Devin for working hard and producing behind the scenes for us on a weekend. And, of course, thanks to John for joining me. John, anything else before we get out of here?
No, just ironically, my grandmother, my mom, and my wife are going shopping today, too. So I got a little time TV with the dogs myself, But I'm pretty excited.
That's right. No problem staying inside and, watching some football when it's 45 degrees out and cloudy on a Saturday. And so we'll enjoy that football time this afternoon. We hope you all enjoy it as well. Maybe we can make some money along the way and we'll catch you all back here next week. So for Devin, for John, I'm Justin. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we will catch you later.